Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Mia Ashton. Mia is a writer for the Post Millennial, and she also has a Substack. It's crymeariver.substack.com. I think I got that right. And Mia writes a lot about gender issues and trans ideology, women's spaces, and you know also trying to focus, I guess, what's going on in Canada. So, hi Mia, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, as I mentioned, like you write a lot about the gender stuff, and that's one of the things in Canada that well, like you hear a lot more about it in the States than you do about it up here. There's a lot more pushback, it seems, in the States than you do see it up here, even in Europe. Here, it's kind of just accepted and no one really talks about it. I mean, Bill C-16, and then now recently, was it Bill C-36 that was the affirmation only care? Like they call it the
It was C6,
yeah.
then C6 died, it came back as C4. C36 is another one that we can talk about. That was a free speech. Well, it was an attack on our free
Yeah,
speech.
yeah. But yeah, so we've had these things come in and there's no one talks about it. No one really talks about men going into women's prisons. No one, like the sports issue, I think, is starting to get some of a bit of attention here. So if you wouldn't mind going into like what you see is going on in Canada and like where we're at and how far lost we are.
Okay. Well, in the last, I would say 6 months, the debate has changed. So I've been in this since 2019. And until about 6 months ago, there was no coverage in the mainstream media, no honest coverage, no one was really prepared to tackle this issue at all, which is why C-16 passed with little opposition, why gender identity and gender expression made it into all provincial human rights codes with no opposition, and why the conversion therapy, the supposed conversion therapy ban also made it without anyone opposing it, because people don't know what this issue is all about. On the surface, it seems rather pleasant. It seems like the next gay rights. It looks like gay rights. You've got the rainbow flags, you've got the oppressed minority just asking for equality or whatever. The way they market it, it looks like gay rights, but it could not be further from the gay rights movement. So in the last 6 months, we've had the National Post publish numerous articles that have been wonderful, that have addressed all of the issues. That's about it, actually. We haven't really had anyone else address it, but that's a start. Yeah, where would you like me to start? Should I start with spaces?
Yeah, I mean, like you know, to me, it's the question of the combating rate. So if you want to go back to C-16, you had Yaniv there, and there it was a question of religious rights versus trans rights, and that's what kind of came to a head. And most people don't realize that if you actually read the ruling from the Human Rights Commission, Yaniv didn't lose because of one right won out over the other. They stated the OJ case, right, where religious rights lost out. Yaniv lost because the court said, well, multiple complaints have been made that have been thrown out, and blah blah blah. Basically, it was a bad witness and it was a bad complainant, and it was just BS claim. But it wasn't because of one right winning out over it. So like, yeah, like that kind of stuff is because you are putting women's rights in opposition to trans rights now, except unless you are a true believer, because then it's just women's rights, period. It's a woman now.
Well, you see, yeah, the Jessica Yaniv thing, that was because of human rights, provincial human rights legislation. C-16 actually changed very little when they added gender identity and gender expression to the criminal code, federal. It changed very little. We'd already had gender identity put into as a protected characteristic in all our provincial human rights codes prior to C-16. And yeah, when you have a choice in society, you can either protect sex, biological sex, or you can protect gender identity. You can never protect both at the same time, because the two are in direct conflict with each other. So you can segregate spaces by biological sex, or you can segregate them by this gender soul that resides within us that nobody can, it's invisible to the naked eye, and you just have to trust people. So if you're in Canada, all over Canada, we have chosen gender identity. Biological sex doesn't matter, women don't matter, women and girls don't deserve protection, and the only people who deserve protection are the people who claim to be in possession of a female gender identity. So this is where the clash has happened, but sex is still a protected characteristic. When they were adding these to the provincial and federal codes, nobody stopped to ask themselves how you could protect these two opposing categories at the same time. They just sort of added gender identity thinking this is the right thing to do and this will make us look really progressive and tolerant, so forget about the women and girls.
Okay, Canadian government doing something without thinking. It's hard to believe.
Shocking.
But yeah, like this with the rights now. The women's spaces thing, that's, like, I started talking about all of this starting around 2014, but mainly on my side is mainly more of race, but it was around 2016 stuff. You've had this going on for a bit now. Like in the UK, I remember this was going back about 3 or 4 years now. It was in London. There were some pools, and you had, a mixed pool, you had a men only pool, you had a women only pool, and then you had this problem of trans women coming to the pool, and these were mainly people who just, self ID and didn't do anything about it. I mean, like, do you find yourself have gotten harsher? Like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm just going to frame this, and then you can correct me on anything I'm wrong. Like, so let's say 2018. So prior to you getting involved in this, if there was someone like, who had transitioned, who looks like a woman, and they go into that swimming pool, as opposed to someone who is just self IDing and like, okay, like me, like the way I look right now, goatee, obviously a veil. I just, yeah, okay, I'm a woman now, and I'm going to come swimming in these pools with you ladies. Like a few years ago, would you have made that distinction, saying, okay, you know what, yeah, that's Blair White, I'll allow it because of this, this, and this, or like, they're doing their best. They like, it's looks like a woman, at least, or whatever. Like, and now have you, like, now would you say the opposite? Like, I don't know what your position was before and what it is now. Like, has it changed, or does it stay the same?
Oh, it's definitely changed. So in 2018, I was woke. It's kind of embarrassing. I was a bit woke. I wasn't extremely woke. I wasn't out there with pronouns and, forcing people to agree with me or anything like that. But I was willing to go along with trans women or women. I didn't believe it. And I honestly didn't think anyone believed it. I thought we were all just going along with it to be kind. So I didn't see the harm of going along with the lie. And then, 2019 came along, and I realized it was actually the point when I realized that we were supposed to actually believe it. We were supposed to believe that trans women were literally women, exactly the same as any other woman. That was the point when I realized that I was not going to support it any longer. So yes, in the past, I suppose I wouldn't have considered, I wouldn't have minded. I know what you're saying. You're saying the sort of fully medically transitioned traditional transsexual,
Yeah.
rather than the self-ID, anything goes these days. Sure, I would have in the past been okay with that. I am very much at the point now, I'm very hardline now, that I think female only spaces, I won't budge on that. I think women and girls deserve the safety, dignity, and protection of female only spaces. And whatever else happens outside of that is someone else's business. But I want female only spaces, and that's not negotiable to me.
Okay. See, like I can respect that, and like, if we were talking about, let's say, a rape shelter or a prison or something like that, or sports. Even though, I mean, sports, unless it's a violent sport, usually like harm is not involved. But like prisons or rape shelters, things like that, like yeah, no, that's a woman's only space. I don't care what you look like. I don't care how many surgeries you've had, whatever. I'm thinking of more in line of like a woman's gym, or like I said, those pools in London. Like, would there be something that's for you a gray area, or would there like, and like I'm sorry, and I don't want to focus this on like how you think of this. I'm just trying to see if like there was a change, but I'd like to get back to really what's going on in Canada and how we've gone so far down, especially in schools. But I'm just curious, like for you, is there a gray area between okay, like swimming in those pools is one thing, but going to a rape shelter, like I said, I would draw that line there. I don't care what you look like, whatever.
Oh,
If you're
there's for
biologically male, there's no way you should go into a women's shelter.
yeah, there's no gray area for me. Bringing it to Canada, let's talk about Bridget Klein Simpson, I believe was his name. Do you recall this story from? I think it was Vancouver Island. It was a few months ago. And it was a very large man who believes that he's a woman. And he
Yeah,
had gone to a female only gym. He had joined a gym, and the gym had a co-ed facility and it had a female only facility. And Bridget decided that because he is a woman, he possesses one of these women's souls, he was entitled to go to the female only gym. Now, I'm not saying Bridget is necessarily a danger. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying he's not a woman, he's male, and he does not belong in a female only gym. It's quite simple, especially when there was a co-ed option available to him. This is a large man. He's hardly going to be at risk in a co-ed gym in any way whatsoever. So he was using the female gym for validation. Surely it's not a safety issue for him. It's to validate his womanhood. That, of course, how could I be okay with that? I'm not okay with that at all. So I think the solution, and it's not simple, but it seems simple in my mind, is female only spaces must be preserved at all costs. And then let's make the other spaces, the male spaces, can then become mixed sex. So if there are women who don't mind sharing with men, then sure, they can go to the mixed sex. And the female spaces can be reserved for women and girls who want the safety and protection of female-only spaces.
yeah, I know. I mean, like again, I'm pretty much exactly where you are. There's just like I said, I've been trying to like weigh out like is there ways to do like find a happy medium. Like for me there are some very, very hard lines, and there's some other things where okay, maybe there's a discussion to be had. But yeah, sticking with Canada, like because it's Quebec is getting some of it now, but I know Ontario and British Columbia are pretty much the most far gone. I think one of the ideas I was being kind of playing around with for the last couple of years was in the school system, they're telling kids that if you're white, you're an oppressor, you're evil, you're always going to be evil. You have this sin of whiteness, can't get rid of it. Then along comes this ideology, which is trans. And if you are non binary or transgender or whatever, you were always that. So you were always oppressed. So you were not always an oppressor. And so it gives you a way out. So, like, so when, then more reading up on the autism stuff, I'm like, okay, so, you know, if you tell an autistic kid that you're an oppressor, like, depending on the level of autism, they're going to take that to their head. That's going to start causing some issues. And if they find a way out, well, they're going to log on to that. So I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's going on in schools, or if you've looked at what, like how do you see that playing out in schools? Like, am I just pulling stuff out of the air, or like, do you think there's something there?
Well, there's definitely, we don't talk enough about this, the wanting to escape oppressor guilt. It really truly is a thing. When you tell young white children that they are evil oppressors, and yet they look at their own lives and they don't see themselves as being very privileged, especially the ones who are struggling if they're autistic, and they're not having an easy time at school, and then they're being told they're an oppressor. But it doesn't even have to be that. It can just be they don't want to be the oppressor. They don't want to be the bad guy. And they don't have any other option. They can't identify out of their whiteness. We know that. They can't. Maybe some might go through a stage of identifying as gay when they're not really. That won't last very long either. So they go for the trans or the non-binary, because that instantly takes them out of the oppressor class and puts them into the oppressed, and then they get this oppressed status. So it's definitely a thing. But our schools are a mess. They really are a mess. Before I started writing for the Post Millennial, that was kind of my thing, was focusing on what's going on in our schools, because specifically with gender, on the one hand, you've got children, very young children, being taught a political ideology that is in no way grounded in reality whatsoever. Gender identity ideology is entirely fictional. And it's being taught to children as if it's scientific fact. So you've got I don't know if you've seen that dreadful gender unicorn.
Yeah, there's that. There's the
genderbread person.
Oh yeah, that's right. Person, not man. That's right.
There's another one. I can't remember what the other one is called. It's just a blob. So they teach them that what makes them a boy or a girl is this gender identity that only they know, and not the material reality of their body. So you've got children being untethered from reality when they're very small. And that continues all the way through school, depending on the teacher. It's not strictly in the curriculum, but you can get, these sort of woke social justice activist teachers who see it as their duty to, indoctrinate. Well, they wouldn't think of it as indoctrinate, educate the young minds into how to be tolerant and inclusive. So at any point in your child's elementary school life, they can find themselves at the mercy of one of these teachers. Then they get to high school and it picks up. The messaging is more intense. They're bombarded with the lies and all of the ideology. And at the same time, they have these crazy privacy policies where if a child comes out as transgender to their teacher, changes their name, changes their pronouns, the schools will keep that a secret from the parents. They will immediately allow it. They'll just immediately allow the social transition, but they don't tell the parents. They'll keep it a secret from the parents. So your child could be going by a different name, opposite sex pronouns, for an entire year, and the school wouldn't even bother to tell you. That's very dangerous, because then the gender identity will concretize in the mind of the child, and by the time the parent finds out, they've got no chance. Well, they've got very little chance of taking them off that path and helping them get past it.
Like, I don't know if this has happened yet or not, but has a school, or if you know of, has a school taken a child to get like hormone therapy without the parents knowing, or is that still like, another something that might happen in the future or something? I don't want to scare tactics.
I have not heard of that happening. That would be another overstep, quite an overstep. You see, I know CHEO. I'm in Ottawa, so CHEO is the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. I believe CHEO will accept referrals from like school counselors or someone in the school system, but you're still not. I think at that point you're going to need parental consent. As far as I know, they can't do that without the parents knowing. But even that by itself, because also at CHEO they put children on puberty blockers on the very first appointment, so you can have your child in this school that is indoctrinating them with all this nonsense. They see a school counselor who is affirming the nonsense and the gender identity, and then the school counselor refers to CHEO, and the kid gets put on blockers on the very first appointment.
I've spoken to a couple of detransitioners. Like, my thing with this is, like, so you're talking about, you get the puberty blockers right away, you get all this. Like in Canada now, especially with the anti-conversion therapy bill, as far as I can see it, I mean, maybe I'm wrong with this, but there's no other option that a doctor or a therapist can give a parent or a child right now, aside from just saying go on this medication. Like you can't talk about alternate treatments. You can't even mention that. Or am I wrong about
Well, in C4, can't remember the exact wording. So C4 is supposedly a conversion therapy ban, but in my opinion, it makes converting the bodies of mostly gay and lesbian teens pretty much the only option. But I do recall there was a clause in there that it was some sort of affirming psychotherapy, or psychotherapy as long as it's affirming is allowed. But there's your problem right there. Well,
it?
if you must affirm the gender identity, then you're not being neutral. And what these young people need is ethical but neutral exploration of where this identity has come from. I don't know if there's another nation that actually has the word cisgender written into law, but C4 has the word cisgender all the way through it. So you're not allowed to preference a cisgender identity over a transgender identity. It's a remarkable piece of legislation, and whether or not it forbids or prohibits the psychotherapy is debatable, but what it certainly does do is make non-affirming therapists reluctant to take on the gender patients because they fear that they could get in trouble if they say the wrong thing. So what we're left with is largely affirmative therapists who are confident in treating the children. They know they won't get in trouble, but those are the ones that you definitely don't want to take your child anywhere near.
Like the reason I kind of like most of my focus on this, like on any of this stuff, and there's the policies that come out from the government. I kind of focus on the education because it's like, okay, if you have these kids going through like I called K through 12 now. I said they're woke madrasas, and it's pretty much what they are to the public school system. And the universities are basically seminaries. So like my focus is on that. It's just like, okay, we can do whatever we want right now, and we could wave a magic wand and change all the policies that are outside of education. But if you don't change that system inside education, I mean, it's a war of attrition that you're going to lose because you're just continuously coming out with people who are indoctrinated to think this way. So it's like that's why I kind of focus more on, because if you're going to have, like you talked about, these woke activist teachers, and that's what I've been seeing when I look at education. They're not teaching kids to read and write and do math. They're teaching kids how to be activists for that thing. So if it's environment, it's how to be an environmental activist. It's not learning science. It's not learning about the environment. It's not learning, what you can do and things like that. It's just how to go out and be an agitator and be an activist. So, I still look at it like, hell, we've got, kids for the last 10 years coming out of university, or, even if you change all the policies and everything, what are these people going to do for work? Like, what are they going to do? Like, they have like expensive student loan debts. They've got no skills. All they've been trained how to do is be agitators. And then now that's like, sorry, there's no longer a demand for that. So it's like that. My worry is, yeah, we need to fix, C16. We need to fix C4. We need to fix all these laws, like the new one the NDP is talking about, where you can't protest outside a drag queen thing or whatever. Like we need to fix that, but we need to cut off the source. If we don't cut off that source, we're done.
I think that's an enormous task, because that is going to require a huge cultural shift, and that's going to happen. The way these woke activists go on right now, it's as if they have found the one true good, and society will never turn against it. All they need to do is push and push and push, and eventually educate us to the point that we accept their one true good, and then we'll all live in some sort of woke utopia. What they don't understand is that there's already a pushback, and I even feel it in Canada. You might not, but I feel a huge change in Canada in the last 6 months or so, there is going to be a huge pushback, and we are going to go hopefully somewhere closer to reality, and we can just get rid of all this junk. You're right, there are going to be a lot of people who will find themselves obsolete with no worthwhile skills, but I have very little sympathy there, I have to say. But even, you mentioned Ontario's Bill 94 is what you're talking about, right? The can I get the alphabet correct? The 2S LGBTQ plus Community Safety Act or something like that. It's not actually to protect drag queens. If you read the bill, the word drag isn't even mentioned in the bill. The bill is to protect this alphabet community. And so there will be they want safe zones around any LGBTQ whatever event where within 100 meters you're not allowed to utter an offensive remark. That will be a crime to utter an offensive remark or have an offensive sign. Now, I have protested on the streets numerous times, and I'll hold a sign. There was a photograph of us at the convoy, and I was holding "No child is born in the wrong body" or something like that. Now, Trudeau tweeted about that to say that there was transphobia at the convoy, and that was just us with our signs. Now, our signs that we had that are very, they're not offensive. They're just reality is offensive to them, but that would technically, under Wong Tam's Bill 94, that would be an offensive remark. So we would be risking an enormous fine by holding a sign saying "No child is born in the wrong body." It's taking us into a very dangerous place, this bill.
Yeah. I mean, okay, again, there's the religious aspect of it to me. It's because everything's wrapped up in identity, and if you take, fundamentalist Muslim, Christian, Jew, like someone from Hindutva, if you criticize the religion, not the person, not any one person, but you criticize ideas in the religion, to them, they are their religion. They don't criticize Islam. It's in there, like, love Islam and Allah more than you. So the very fundamentalists take that. It's the same thing here. So when when you say that no child is born in the wrong body, you're criticizing their identity. So then it's, criticizing them. It was the same thing with, saw this a few years back, and I still see it every now and then. If you cure someone of their deafness, you're committing a genocide on the deaf identity.
Yeah.
That's insanity. But that's where we're at. And we're fighting a religious fervor. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like, it's the Crusades or some sort of jihad or something like that. But I mean, we are fighting religious fanatics.
This is a religion of a different kind, though, because this is any other religious belief in society, in Canadian society. You can hold it privately. So if you're Christian, you don't need everyone to be Christian in your community in order for you to maintain your belief. If you believe in reincarnation, you don't need everyone in society around you to also believe in reincarnation in order to sustain that belief. But the thing about the religion of gender is it requires that everyone participate. It's not enough that a man can believe himself to be in possession of a woman's soul and that makes him a woman. It's not enough. He can't hold that belief individually. Everyone in society also has to believe or pretend to believe that he is a woman, and we have to welcome him into all of our spaces. So it's a religion where everyone is forced to participate.
Okay, yeah, it is okay. So my take on that is, like, if you take a look at, like, I'll stick with Islam because I just read something today where in Sweden they're asking the government to stop. I can't remember which city. They want them to stop the food festival because it's falling during Ramadan. Now, that's Muslims imposing their religious values on the rest of it. And it's not coming from all Muslims. It's coming from a very fundamentalist faction of it. The gender ideology, or for the most part, woke, whatever you want to call it, it is a new and upcoming faith. So most of these people are new converts, and new converts always want to show that they're the most pious and they're the most faithful. So they're gonna force it on everyone else. And like the way I'll where I do agree more with you there is Islam. Yes, you can stop them from having that food festival. Let's just say you can't stop them from eating during the day.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here, they want you to disbelieve reality. Like you have to believe that 2 + 2 = 5. You
Yeah.
cannot believe, or that a man can give birth to a child. Sorry, I'm not going to believe that. So yeah, like that's where I'll give you that. But it is because, in my mind, it's because it's a fundamentalist faith. They're all fundamentalists at this point because it's new, and they have to go out and spread the good news. They have to let everyone know, and they have to, you know. And I mean, that's when I said I spoke to transitioners. That was another thing I noticed as well. Like both Sinead and Helena, where they said after about 5 or 6 years, I was like, okay, well, that's when they really went into detransitioning and going back. They might have thought about it earlier before. And if I look at converts, I could speak more to Islam again on this, is after about 5 years, either they become like completely fundamentalist or they become moderate or they leave. And it's at that point where that final decision is made. So it's like for the first 5 years, it's kind of like you're trying it on, you're not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, in this case, you know, trying it on could mean surgery, it could mean like hormone therapy, it could mean a lot of like irreversible stuff.
Irreversible stuff performed at a time of identity development as well.
Yeah.
It's not, it's one of the craziest things really is that we have somehow we're supposed to believe that a teenager's identity is fixed and that they will always have that identity all throughout their life. A 14-year-old, if she says she will never want children, if you take away gender, if an average 14-year-old said she would never want children, you would never believe her, because you know that most 14-year-olds probably don't want to become mothers, and that over time that will likely change. But if the teenage girl says she's a boy, you add gender into the mix, all of a sudden we have to believe that she will never ever want children, that this is fixed and she knows who she's going to be in the future. That's totally baffling to me, because between age 12 and 25, we know that's a crucial stage of identity development. You go through many different versions of yourself until you finally settle into the adult that you will one day become. And the fact that we are intervening, we are, well, first of all, blocking the puberty, which blocks the natural maturity that puberty would bring. Then we're giving them the cross-sex hormones, and then we're chopping body parts off them, healthy body parts that they will one day very likely want, all before they've even reached full maturity. It's got to be one of humanity's greatest crimes.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this for a couple of years, and even like 2 years ago, I said when the lawsuits start happening, it's going to make like the recovered memory scandal that happened in the '80s. It's going to make that look like nothing, because that was, I think, 50 cases or something. Here you're talking, you know, I don't even want to know the number. Like the numbers are insane.
I often try to put a number on this, and I just can't. We just don't know. I was reading the other day about one clinic that currently has 1,800 kids, and that's just one clinic over all of the clinics all over the world, and over all the years. I do not know the numbers. But the recovered memory, that's been my thing for a long time. Multiple personality, the recovered memory, satanic panic. That one was huge, and lives were destroyed, communities were destroyed, and it was absolute madness. And I think you can draw an awful lot of parallels between the two. It's not really, it's hard to say. This one, because it has the surgical element, and because it is targeting, really it's targeting our most vulnerable young people. It's not targeting the young people who are thriving and doing really well in life. It's targeting, it's the young people who are struggling, who get sucked in, and that's what makes it so tragic. But the recovered memory, that was insane. That was completely what they did to those women was completely insane. And they really truly did ruin lives in a different way.
Yeah, when I said like it was only 50 cases, I believe what I read was there was 50 lawsuits. So I mean, there's a lot more
Mm-hmm.
people affected.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be the same in this. There's going to be more people that were
Yeah.
affected than that take it to court. Um, I mentioned detransitioners a couple of times, and I remember when C4 was being debated, there was don't know if it was an MP or if it was a provincial member of parliament, and it was from the NDP, and he said, straight out, like, "Oh, detransitioners are a right wing lie."
It's Randall Garrison. I remember that day very well. That was when it was C6 Justice. There was a Justice Committee. Yep. He's NDP somewhere out in BC. I'm not really sure.
But yeah,
Uh,
I mean, like you said, things are changing in the last 6 months. Are you seeing? I try to keep up with the media, but like obviously you can't want to see everything or watch everything. But I don't notice that much talk about detransitioners per se in Canada. Like I've heard it in other countries. Um, Even if it's just getting more vocal, saying, "Oh, that's not a real thing," but at least they're talking about it. Whereas I don't see any of that in Canada.
well, we have Michelle Zakinia, the first detrans lawsuit. She's in Ontario. So when she announced her lawsuit, the National Post did a great piece, maybe more than one piece. No one else picked up the story, as far as I can remember. No mainstream outlet picked up her story, but she definitely has brought the conversation into the public. Around the same time, CTV did its usual garbage article where they just churn out nonsense junk science that just is just absurd. Like I recall it had the 1% detransition rate. They still, most people in gender clinics, they will still tell parents that the detransition rate is less than 1%. So CTV were pushing that lie. They were pushing they even at one point in the article they said over the years detransition has gone down as the screening process has improved. It's the most absurd lie I've ever seen in print anywhere. The screening process has been thrown out the window. There is no screening process. They transition all of them that walk through the door. And we have studies. There are two studies. I think they might both be Canadian, one Canadian American and one Canadian, where the detransition rate for one of them is 16% and the detransition rate for the other is 29%. We are so far from the 1% detransition rate that they are still pushing that it's really not like it's amazing that they can still cling to that, but they have to cling to the 1%. Because if you admit that detransition is real, then you have to admit that you've done terrible harm. Whether you're a journalist, whether you're in a gender clinic, or whoever, a politician, if you've been pushing for this medical atrocity, as soon as you admit detransition is real, you have to admit that you've done terrible harm. So they're just ignoring that right now, but they can't ignore it forever.
Okay, the 1% thing, like my understanding of that statistic, and again, I could be wrong about this, was that it was because most of the people who detransitioned just stopped going to the clinic, so you didn't have an exact number. You just had people who stopped. So did they ever take, like, I'm just curious if anyone ever looked, okay, you only got 1% detransitioning, but you have a 30% dropout rate or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah, for sure. The dropout rate is always huge. The 1% comes from the time before the social contagion, before the trans rights movement kicked off this social contagion, and before the medical world lost its mind and just started affirmation and transitioning anyone who walks through the door of a gender clinic. So the 1%, even then, back then, when there was gatekeeping, and they really truly tried to select the people for whom transition would be a success. And yes, 1% detransition rate is surely not accurate, because most people either detransition and just disappear and never contact the healthcare providers again. They're gone. or there can be in the past there used to be a lot of not necessarily detransition, because really when you think about it, detransition is not possible. Once you've gone all the way, there is no going back, and detransition sort of sounds like you can just go back and everything's okay. So I think there might be a lot of people who live with the regret. They haven't necessarily detransitioned, but they wouldn't be considered thriving and happy. And so for Randall Garrison, that day, I remember being so furious that day when they wouldn't, first of all, they wouldn't, for the C6 hearing, they wouldn't allow Detrans Canada to testify. They refused the application of Detrans Canada. And then I have to mention this person, they didn't let Detrans Canada testify, but they did let an autogynephilic man who thinks he's a woman. He testified. Randall Garrison, I'm sure, was a part of this. He testified to say rapid onset gender dysphoria is not real and trans women are not autogynephiles. Now, autogynephilia is the driving force behind a lot of men's desire to become a woman, and that is it's a fetish. It's an erotic desire to become a woman. And then this person, this autogynephilic man who testified, his Twitter history is full of his autogynephilic masturbation habits. There's all sorts of tweets of him saying all sorts of very, very inappropriate things for Twitter, as far as I'm concerned. But Randall Garrison chose to listen to this man rather than Detrans Canada. He just chose to ignore the fact that detransitioners exist. It didn't go through at C6. It went through after the next election.
Like, I've heard it said to people like, okay, well, you were never really trans then. I'm like, I'm sorry, but okay, I'll take my brother-in-law as an example. My brother-in-law converted to Islam, married my sister. I mean, they've been married like over 20 years, whatever. I'm not saying anything like, but let's say they were to divorce tomorrow and he quits Islam. Someone could say, well, you're never really Muslim because you, that I can kind of understand. But someone, going through surgery and doing all these medical procedures, no one really does that on a whim. Like, you weren't really trans. Like, I don't know how. I know they deny reality, but like to actually say that to someone, and it's the same thing. Like I said, I see it on the religious end. Oh, you weren't really Muslim, really this.
Well, I mean, if they weren't really trans, why did they get all the medical interventions? So there's the problem right there, is that if I don't believe there is such a thing as true trans. I don't believe anyone is trans. It's not an innate, immutable trait. Gender dysphoria is a mental illness. And one of the treatments for this particular mental illness is medical transition. So transition is something that you do. It's not something that you are.
Yep.
So first and foremost, I don't believe in any of it. But let's just say there were people who really are trans. If that's the case, doctors are going to have to find a way to figure out who's who. Because right now, at this point, at the start of the process, no healthcare professional can tell who is trans and who is not. Or you can word it in a more realistic way, who is going to do well with medical transition and who is not. Particularly when it's children, you can't tell which children are likely to persist. They are the minority, far, far in the minority, and which children are likely to desist and just grow up to be gay or lesbian. So what needs to happen if we're going to continue with this medical experiment is they're going to have to figure out who is going to benefit from this medical treatment, rather than right now they just put everyone on the pathway and hope for the best,
I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I'd like to talk about one thing here because it's so glaring that the hypocrisy of all this. So trans rights. Like, I mean, I grew up in the '80s. I was a kid. I remember even back then. If a girl wants to play with trucks, let a girl play with trucks. If a boy wants to play with dolls, let a boy play with dolls. It's just a boy playing with dolls. Like, it was supposed to be no problem with that, and that's fine. Like I said, little boy wants to play with dolls, let him play with dolls. Who cares? But now it's if a boy plays with dolls, then he's a girl. I mean, I've heard parents say, "Well, my boy had long hair, so he must want to be a girl." So we started transitioning it, and it's like your kid had, so like the hypocrisy in that, like they're bringing back, the '50s gender stereotypes,
Of
and
course.
then there's the hypocrisy with like what you mentioned, gay and lesbian kids, like you know, if especially on the lesbian side of it, like those suck my woman dick. I mean, like stuff like that. Like, I mean, there's a guy who was running for New York State Democratic Party. Like he was giving a speech on stage. He was wearing a tight, and I'm saying he was wearing a tight knit skirt, and you could see his erection.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah.
I mean, and he put out tweets where he said like, suck my woman dick. Like, and I don't mean to be crude, but like when they say that, and it's you know you talk about conversion therapy, and then you're telling a lesbian woman, to perform fellatio on a man. Like, I mean, it's just, or like I
It's
said, with the gender stereotype.
it's entirely the entire movement is based on regressive stereotypes and homophobia. That's and misogyny. And so if you look at the trans kids, I agree with you. I think we were at one point we were getting to a place where toys are just toys. There's no such thing as a girl toy, there's no such thing as a boy toy. It's not technically true in the sense that I think I have both. I have two boys and a girl, and I've seen the difference in how they play. And so there are boys will be typically drawn to one type of toy and girls typically to another. But we were getting to a place where it was okay for girls to play one however they want. You can play however you want. And then along came the trans rights movement, and all of a sudden, yes, you just have to look at the celebrity so-called trans kids. You've got Jazz Jennings, who was a very effeminate, sweet little boy who loved to wear dresses and dance around and do ballet and wore a sparkly bathing suit. So his parents decided that made him a girl. And now look at the state of his life. He's gone through the most brutal medical pathway, and I do not believe he has found happiness. You've got Susie Green of Mermaids, the trans charity in England. Same thing. She tells the story that her sweet little boy, her husband was homophobic and couldn't deal with her little boy wearing a Snow White outfit. So they transitioned. The little boy told him he was a girl. There's another one in the US, Kai Shapley. Same thing. It's just they would the mother is on camera admitting that they used to spank the child for playing with girl toys. It's all regressive stereotypes, and then all three of those boys are almost certainly they were just future gay men, and their parents couldn't. Extreme gender nonconformity in childhood is strongly indicated. It's a strong indicator of homosexuality in adulthood. So you've just got homophobia and regressive stereotypes ruining the lives of these poor little children.
Yeah, I mean, okay, and again, like Pink News and Code Pink praising Iran and Pakistan transitioning people. Oh, look how progressive they are. It's like, no, they're giving these people a choice, like get killed or transition.
Yeah.
You can live your life out as a quote unquote straight couple, or one of you is going to die, or both of you are going to die. Right? I mean, it's the same thing here. It's the like I've asked a couple of people this, and I don't think there's enough statistics because I've heard rumblings of it in some certain fundamentalist religious corners, like Muslim and fundamentalist evangelical Christians, where it's better to transition the kid to make them straight than to have a gay son or daughter, like gay or lesbian. So, I mean, there is that as well. Like it's fundamentalism. Like it doesn't matter. Like we just want these ends. They don't care that. Okay, I want to make this clear. Should ask maybe the question because I haven't seen it anywhere. But so let's say someone goes through transition and they've transitioned into they're now a trans woman. They've completed all the surgery. They've completed all that. Is there support after the fact, or are they just left on their own? Like I'm just curious, like how much because they talk about the suicidality and all that. I'm just curious, like after transition, like do these clinics or whatever offer support, or like support groups, or because you still have that high suicide rate going, after people transition.
I don't think I don't think they're offering very much support. I think there's a major problem with those embarking on transition do not have a realistic idea of what transition is. They have a very idealized idea, like they think it's going to solve all their problems. They think once they get to the end of the medical pathway, they will be happy. They will finally find themselves and they will finally find happiness. And I think it rarely turns out that way. Maybe for some it does, but I think very often it does not. And yes, you're right. There's no, as far as I know, there are no support groups on the other side to help them navigate life as a transgender person. And I think they're being sold a lie. I think there's a wonderful, I often talk about this. I don't know if you know who Az Hakim is. I think he was a psychiatrist at the Tavistock, the soon to be closed Tavistock Gender Clinic in London. And he did a brilliant thing where this is pre the social contagion, pre the political movement, where he had a group of people wanting to transition. And he put them together in the same group with the people who regretted their transition. They hadn't necessarily detransitioned, but they regretted aspects of it. And he put the two together so that the people wanting to transition could hear from the people who had gone through it, and they could understand each other. And he had a 98% success rate in that 98% did not ultimately go on to medically transition because they understood what it really is rather than the rainbows and unicorns that they were being sold. And so I think he said if the 2% who did transition went into it with a much more realistic idea and therefore had a much greater chance of succeeding and thriving in life. But because we're not allowed to talk about the negative aspect of this, we're supposed to pretend that it's all wonderful and we have to celebrate it, and nobody's allowed to talk about the side effects or the complications or anything. So people are not being prepared for what they're embarking upon. And then when they get to the other end, they're not being supported when perhaps it doesn't turn out quite how they thought it would.
Yeah, okay. And also on my end, I just want to clarify. Like, I'd much rather they got proper care before the transition than after. And I was just curious, like once you push them through this, they're just turning it out like a factory. Then they don't care about it after the fact. It's just because if you're not taking some care at the start, I mean, at least you should make sure the people you're quote unquote treating are able to live in the outside world after.
Well, part of the problem is we depathologized it. So around like 2010, when the movement was just building up, they decided to depathologize being transgender. So it's basically now it's an identity, it's an innate immutable trait, and it's not a mental illness. And we're forbidden from calling it a mental illness, gender dysphoria. It's now just this transgender identity. So if these people are embarking on this really brutal medical pathway, but they do not have a mental illness, they're not ill. It's this bizarre, I don't know how they hold this belief in their mind where perfectly healthy people requiring body part amputation. It doesn't really go well together, but we have to pretend that gender dysphoria is not a mental illness. We have to pretend that it's a perfectly natural, healthy thing to want to do, to have your genitals chopped off or have your body parts chopped off. And so why would we provide support to these perfectly healthy people who, at the end of their medical pathway, they are supposed to be thriving because that is their life-saving care? We're told this all the time. It's nonsense, but that's what we're told. Why would you need to provide support when this is the answer? This is the solution.
I guess that's part of it too. Like if they needed this as a cure, I mean, like my legs are broken and I broke my back, I need surgery, or whatever. Afterwards, I'm gonna need to like rehabilitate. So I mean, that's all considered when you're doing that surgery. Like, there's nothing considered after the fact. It's magic thinking. Like, as soon as we do this, you're gonna be fixed. It's like, no, I'm sorry.
And it's all
go ahead, sorry.
It's brutal and it's experimental as well. The idea that this insane medical pathway is going to fix everything and then you won't need any help afterwards, your life will be perfect. That's madness,
Yeah.
complete madness.
Um, Again, like I said, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I know that there's, you mentioned like the last 6 months you're feeling a little more hopeful, but I know that there's like groups out in Canada now that are starting to push back. There's one, I think it's like Cause bars. Like I know it's Canadian Women.
Oh,
I think it's
yeah.
like it's CAWSBAR or something like that. And there's
Cause bar. I pronounce it cause bar, but that's because I'm
okay.
from England. Cause bar. It
I don't know.
sounds
I just saw like call like as in a call of a crow. Like I wasn't sure how you pronounced it, so I wasn't.
cause bar. Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
in there, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've been around for, I think probably since 2018, I'm going to
Mhm.
guess. It's it's difficult with cause bar. We have to be careful that we don't let in the wrong people. We're growing and growing, but there's we're also careful about security, so we're not letting in people who might have not so good intentions. But yeah, it's just a cross Canada coalition of women, to
Yeah.
raise awareness. We did a overpass, Operation Overpass, where we hung a banner
Yeah.
over the overpass on the Queensway in Ottawa. It was really fun.
Yeah. I mean, like there's like certain things coming back, but what would you like to see happen in Canada? Like, would you like to see more local involvement with parents and stuff, or like how do you think we can start like really making effective change? Because I mean, even if we got the conservatives in parliament, and I mean, okay, even if you got like Maxime Bernier in power tomorrow, it's not going to change because this stuff is so entrenched. And like I mean, like it's in the bureaucracy, it's everywhere. Like I don't know. From like I said, my personal thing is like I think we need more local thing, but I don't know what if you have any ideas on that. Like, what,
Well, I mean, I would like to see people just talking about it for one, like we're doing now, but just everybody needs to. We still have free speech. We still have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. However, I understand that I am in a unique position because I cannot get fired. I cannot lose my job for saying anything that I've said today. It's not possible. Many people could if they spoke out, but I would like to see people get over their fear and just start talking about it. Protests are great. There have been lots of protests. There's a young man in Ontario, Josh Alexander, the high school student who is excluded from his school for saying there are only two sexes and organizing a single sex bathroom protest. So Josh, I think he's inspiring the youth of Canada. His protests are growing and growing, and high school students are starting to rebel against the indoctrination and just refuse to be silenced on this issue. So we've got him waking up the young people, and then there are protests. The drag queen protests, sometimes I think drag queen story time protests, sometimes we don't get the nuance to the issue. There can be people on one side, they think it's just a fun form of dress up and you're a bigot if you disagree. And then there are people on the other side who just scream pedophile into a megaphone. That's not really helping either. You need to have I like the protests, but I think we've got to have the conversation to go with it. I would like to see people. We write briefs. I've written so many briefs. I've written so many emails. And they just fall on deaf ears. So it almost feels like that's a complete waste of time. But I don't think anything is really truly a waste of time. Every tiny little effort is going to chip away at this sort of fortress that we have to dismantle.
yeah, I mean, like I said, for myself personally, I think more local involvement.
School boards. Well, that's where it's been happening in Ottawa. We've had some great. There was Nick Morabito, the father who raised concerns about males in female bathrooms. The response from the Rainbow people was as predictable as you can imagine, but it did bring the conversation out, and that's all we need to do. People don't realize what's happening, and they don't realize the seriousness of it. So once the conversation is out there, it will tip quite quickly, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think once people realize. Um, anyways, it was great talking to you. If you want to let people know where they can get a hold of you, where they can find your stuff, I'll put the links to some of your articles in Post Millennial in the description. I'll put a link to your Substack as well. But
Oh, sure. I should correct that. The Substack, I did once last summer, I think, take Crimea River. I don't use that Substack. The piece I had published was on Michael Schellenberger's Substack
Okay.
Public. My Substack, there's nothing there. There's nothing to see. So on Twitter, it's at _ Crimea River. Mia is MIA. And then I write daily for the Post Millennial news coverage on gender.
Right, well, thanks a lot, Mia. It was great talking to you.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
Thanks everyone for listening.